It was Christmas Eve, and the Parker family was snowed in. Their quaint home sat on the edge of a wooded area, miles from the nearest neighbor, and the blizzard outside showed no signs of stopping. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and piling snowdrifts high against the doors. Inside, however, the scene was warm and festive. The fireplace crackled with a cozy glow, and the Christmas tree stood adorned with twinkling lights and glittering ornaments. James Parker, the father, leaned back in his armchair, sipping a steaming cup of cocoa. His wife, Diane, sat beside him on the couch, knitting a scarf while their two children, Lily and Noah, played with a train set under the tree. The room smelled of pine and cinnamon, and for a moment, it felt like the perfect holiday evening. But there was something about the storm, something unsettling. The wind's mournful wail seemed to carry whispers, faint but persistent. At first, James thought it was just his imagination, but the unease was hard to shake. Lily, the youngest at 8 years old, looked up from the train set. "Why does it sound so quiet out there?" she asked, her big brown eyes peering out the frost-covered window. "It's the snow, honey," Diane replied. "It muffles everything. It's just how storms work." James chuckled. "Maybe the snowmen are coming to life," he joked. But his attempt to lighten the mood fell flat. Diane gave him a look, and the kids didn't laugh. That's when Diane decided to check the back door. The wind had been rattling it more than usual, and she wanted to make sure it was secure. She pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders and walked into the darkened kitchen. When she reached the door, she froze. There, in the snow just beyond the back steps, were footprints. They were large, unmistakably human, and led directly to the house. Her heart raced as she peered closer. The tracks seemed fresh, the edges still sharp despite the swirling snow. "James," she called out, her voice shaking. "Come here." James appeared moments later, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" She pointed to the footprints. "Look." James leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. His jovial demeanor faded. "Could be a hiker or someone lost in the storm," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "I'll check it out." "All." Diane grabbed his arm. "Don't. If someone's out there, they might not be friendly." James hesitated but nodded. He double-checked the lock on the door and pulled the curtain shut. "If they're lost, they'll knock," he said, trying to reassure her. But neither of them felt reassured. The family tried to settle back into their Christmas routine, but the atmosphere had changed. The kids seemed restless, and Diane couldn't focus on her knitting. James sat staring into the fire, his cup of cocoa untouched. An hour passed. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, a soft scratching noise, like branches brushing against the siding. But it grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't the wind. It was something or someone. James stood and grabbed a flashlight from the mantel. "I'll check it out," he said, though his voice was tight with unease. He walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The beam of the flashlight illuminated the snow-covered yard, but nothing moved. The footprints at the back door were still visible, but they didn't continue past the house. "Nothing," he muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the Christmas tree lights began to flicker. Lily let out a startled yelp, and Diane rushed to her side. "It's just the power," Diane said, though she knew the fireplace and the rest of the house lights were unaffected. Then the radio, an old model that sat unused on a shelf, crackled to life. A warped version of Silent Night played, the melody distorted and haunting. Noah, who was 10, stared at the radio. "Why is it doing that?" James turned it off, his hand shaking. "Old wiring," he said, though no one believed him. As the hours dragged on, the scratching continued intermittently. Diane noticed something else. One of the windows in the living room had fogged up, as though someone had been breathing on it from the outside. But when she looked closer, she saw no one. The children were growing increasingly frightened. Lily claimed she saw a shadow near the tree, a tall, dark figure that disappeared when she blinked. Diane tried to calm her, but even she felt the tension building. Then came the turning point. A loud thud echoed from the back door. The family froze. James grabbed a fire poker and motioned for everyone to stay put. He slowly approached the door, his heart pounding. When he reached it, he found the door slightly ajar. Snow blew in, and on the floor lay an old, frostbitten photograph. James picked it up, his hands trembling. The picture showed a family standing in front of the same house. but it was clearly taken decades ago. Diane found the photograph deeply unsettling. She suggested they all stay together in one room for the rest of the night. James agreed and brought them to the master bedroom. He barricaded the door with a chair and kept the fire poker within arm's reach. As they huddled together, the scratching resumed, this time louder and more insistent. The children clung to Diane, who whispered soothing words despite her own rising panic. James tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually claimed him. He awoke to the sound of footsteps inside the house. Slow, deliberate footsteps. He grabbed the fire poker and quietly moved toward the door. When he opened it, the footsteps stopped. The hallway was empty, but the air was icy cold. He noticed a faint, wet trail on the wooden floor, as though someone had been walking with snow-covered boots. By dawn, the storm had subsided. The family cautiously emerged from the bedroom, exhausted but unharmed. James decided to check the attic, hoping to find answers. What he found chilled him to the bone. An old journal lay tucked away in a corner, its pages yellowed with age. The entries told the story of a man who had lived in the house many years ago. During a particularly harsh winter, he had been locked out during a storm and froze to death. The family realized the horrifying truth. The stranger in the snow was not a man, but the ghost of someone who had perished in that very storm, seeking warmth and perhaps revenge. As they packed their belongings, preparing to leave the house for good, they glanced back one last time. In the snow, fresh footprints led from the woods to the back door. And this time they didn't stop. They disappeared inside. The Thompson family had always cherished their quiet suburban Christmases. Sarah, Tom, and their 16-year-old daughter, Emily, loved the cozy traditions of decorating the tree, baking cookies, and watching snow blanket their neighborhood. But this year would be different. This year, something dark and unexplainable would shatter their holiday cheer. It started on December 20th. Sarah opened the front door to retrieve the mail and found an unexpected package sitting on the porch. Wrapped in ornate red and gold paper with an intricate bow, the gift had no return address or sender's name. The tag simply read, "For the Thompsons." Sarah brought it inside, setting it on the dining table. When Tom returned from work, they examined it together, but neither could recall anyone who might send such an extravagant-looking gift. Emily, always curious, was the one who finally convinced them to open it. Inside was an antique music box, beautifully carved with swirling patterns and adorned with delicate inlays of mother-of-pearl. When Emily lifted the lid, a hauntingly beautiful melody began to play. The tune was unfamiliar, slow and melancholic, yet oddly captivating. The family admired the craftsmanship, but something about the box unsettled Sarah. It was too perfect, too deliberate. "Probably just a quirky gift from an old friend," Tom said, brushing off her concerns. "We'll ask around after Christmas." They placed the music box on the mantel above the fireplace. That night, it played again on its own. The first strange incident happened the following morning. Sarah woke to find Emily staring at the music box, her hand resting on its lid. The soft melody filled the room, but Emily's expression was vacant, her eyes unfocused. "Emily," Sarah called. Her voice seemed to snap Emily out of a trance. I don't know why I'm here," Emily said, confused. "I just heard it playing." Sarah's unease deepened. She decided to place the box in a cabinet, out of sight and out of mind. But that night, the music returned, drifting faintly through the house. Tom searched the cabinet, but the box wasn't there. They found it back on the mantel, its lid open, the tune echoing eerily through the living room. By December 22nd, the family began experiencing vivid, horrifying visions. Tom's encounter was the first. While working late in his study, he saw a reflection in the darkened window. It wasn't his own, it was a gaunt, pale man with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. When Tom turned, there was no one there, but the reflection lingered a moment longer, as if mocking him. The next evening, Sarah heard whispers as she folded laundry in the basement. The words were indistinct, like a chorus of voices murmuring just out of earshot. When she turned off the washer to listen, the whispers stopped. But in the silence, she could hear the faint melody of the music box, even though it was 2 floors above her. Emily's experiences were the most harrowing. She began dreaming of a snow-covered forest, endlessly vast and suffocatingly dark. In the dreams, she wandered aimlessly, drawn by the music, which grew louder the deeper she went. One morning, she woke with frostbite-like marks on her hands. "Mom, I think it's the music box," Emily said tearfully. "It's doing something to us." Sarah and Tom couldn't deny it any longer. The gift was no mere trinket, it was cursed. Desperate for answers, "It won't let me go," Emily sobbed. "I tried to put it down, but my hands won't move." Tom pried the box from her grip and hurled it into the fireplace. The flames turned an unnatural blue as the box burned, and a deafening screech echoed through the house. The temperature plummeted, and the shadowy figure from Tom's vision materialized in the corner of the room. It was the gaunt man, his hollow eyes fixed on the family. He reached out with skeletal hands as if trying to pull them into the flames. "Leave us alone," Sarah screamed. She grabbed a crucifix from Emily's nightstand and held it up. The figure recoiled, its form dissolving into smoke as the music box disintegrated in the fire. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the flames. By Christmas morning, the Thompsons thought the nightmare was over. The music box was gone, and the house felt lighter, less oppressive. But as they opened presents, Emily froze, her face pale. "What's wrong, honey?" Sarah asked. Emily pointed to the tree. Beneath it was a small package, wrapped in the same ornate red and gold paper. The tag read, "For the Thompsons." They didn't open it. Instead, Tom took it outside and buried it deep in the snow. The family decided to leave town that day, staying with relatives until the new year. When they returned, the house seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. But sometimes, late at night, Sarah swears she hears the faint strains of that haunting melody drifting through the halls, a chilling reminder that some gifts are never truly gone. There's something about a snow-covered cabin deep in the woods that's both magical and eerie. For 5 friends, Mark, Sophie, Alex, Rachel, and Ben, it was supposed to be the perfect Christmas getaway. They had planned this trip for months, no distractions, no responsibilities, just a few days of relaxation and holiday cheer. What they didn't know was that their festive escape would turn into a waking nightmare. The drive up to the cabin had been treacherous, with winding roads blanketed by freshly fallen snow. When they finally arrived, the cabin looked like something out of a holiday postcard. Icicles dangled from the roof, and the snow-covered trees surrounded the property like silent sentinels. The group quickly unpacked their belongings, eager to get inside and start the celebration. As Sophie carried a box of supplies to the porch, she noticed something odd. Sitting on the wooden steps was a weathered ornament. It was a cracked glass ball with what looked like a faint, pulsing glow inside. She called out to the others. "Hey, did anyone leave this here?" The group gathered around to look at it. Alex shrugged. "Probably left by the last guests. Kinda creepy, though." Sophie hesitated but eventually placed it on a nearby shelf. "Whatever. Let's just get everything inside. It's freezing out here." That evening, the friends decorated the cabin, stringing up lights and hanging stockings over the fireplace. They laughed, exchanged stories, and even played some Christmas music on an old Bluetooth speaker. By the time dinner rolled around, everyone was in high spirits. But Sophie couldn't shake a strange feeling. As they sat around the table eating, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned to the frosted window and froze. A dark figure was standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the dim light. "Mark," she whispered, nudging him. "Look." Mark followed her gaze but saw nothing. "What are you talking about?" "There was someone there," she insisted. Ben, ever the skeptic, stood up. "Let's settle this." He grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The group followed, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The snow was undisturbed, with no footprints leading to or from the window. "See? Nothing," Ben said, waving the flashlight around. "Probably just your imagination." Sophie frowned but didn't argue. Still, as they returned to the warmth of the cabin, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Later that night, as they exchanged gifts, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The fire in the hearth began to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then the lights dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness before stabilizing again. "That was weird," Rachel said, glancing nervously at the others. Just as they were starting to relax, Ben noticed a new gift under the tree. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no tag. "Who's this from?" he asked, holding it up. No one claimed responsibility. "Not funny, guys," he said, tearing the paper open. Inside was the cracked glass ornament Sophie had found earlier, now leaking a strange, dark liquid. The glow inside seemed stronger, almost alive. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, taking a step back. The Bluetooth speaker suddenly crackled, and a distorted version of Silent Night began to play. The fire dimmed again, this time almost going out entirely. Then Rachel screamed. Everyone turned to see her pointing at the window. A pale face was pressed against the glass, its sunken black eyes staring into the room. Before anyone could react, it was gone. They rushed to the window and looked outside. Once again, there were no footprints in the snow. Panic began to set in. The group decided to leave, but when they tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. The windows wouldn't break, no matter how hard they hit them. It was as if the cabin itself was keeping them trapped. "We need to stay together," Mark said, grabbing a fire poker. "Whatever this is, we're not splitting up." As the night wore on, the group began experiencing strange and terrifying phenomena. Sophie claimed she could hear whispers coming from the forest, soft and unintelligible but undeniably there. Rachel felt something tugging at her blanket while she tried to rest, but when she turned on the flashlight, there was nothing there. The worst came for Alex. He had been examining the markings on the walls, strange, glowing symbols that none of them remembered seeing before. When he touched one, he recoiled in pain. "It burned me," he shouted, though his hand showed no visible marks. The breaking point came just after midnight. The group was huddled in the living room when the dark figure appeared inside the cabin. It stood in the corner, motionless, its hollow eyes fixed on them. Ben grabbed a chair and threw it at the figure, but it vanished before the chair could hit it. In its place was the cracked ornament, now pulsing with an intense light. "We have to destroy it," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "That thing came with it. It has to be connected." The group agreed. Mark grabbed the ornament and threw it into the fireplace. The cabin shook violently, and the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of disjointed voices. The dark figure reappeared, more corporeal and menacing than before. It reached for Sophie, who suddenly froze. Her eyes widened as she whispered, "It wants me." "What are you talking about?" Rachel shouted, grabbing her arm. "The whispers. They've been calling me all night," Sophie said, her voice eerily calm. "If I go, maybe it will stop." Before anyone could stop her, Sophie opened the door. The snowstorm outside had stopped, leaving an eerie stillness. The figure followed her out, and both disappeared into the forest. By dawn, the remaining friends found the door unlocked. They fled the cabin, leaving everything behind. When they returned with authorities days later, Sophie was nowhere to be found. The only trace of her was a faint set of footprints leading into the woods, which stopped abruptly in the middle of an open clearing. The cabin itself was abandoned, but the glowing symbols remained etched into the walls. The ornament was gone, and no one could explain what had happened. Years later, another group of visitors discovered the cabin. They found a cracked glass ornament on the porch and a faint whisper on the wind, "Silent night, deadly night."